Well, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Heather Warfield to our meeting to deliver the keynote talk. I first encountered Heather while I was listening to her interview with last year's keynote speaker, Dave Whitson, and on his podcast called the Camino Podcast. It was episode 32, and she was discussing her research into the lived experiences of pilgrims. What are the themes that emerge when speaking to people who do various kinds of pilgrimage? And in particular, what is the impact on returning home, and how can pilgrims approach that return intentionally? And as that's of particular interest here in our chapter, I contacted her. And speaking of podcasts, before I go on, I want to just plug her latest initiative. I'm happy to share that Heather is the creator and host of a new podcast entitled Psychology of Pilgrimage. So we'll be looking forward to hearing more about that soon. Heather's a professor at the School of Counseling, Psychology, and Therapy at Antioch University. Her research is focused on the psychology of pilgrimages, pilgrims' inner processes, and the therapeutic outcomes of all types of pilgrimage journeys. She has a particular interest in the widespread, in the widespread pilgrimages that occurred after the First World War. And her work has involved modern-day military veterans and how pilgrimage can be therapeutic and healing for them. And she's consulted with the US group Veterans on the Camino, for example. Building on how transformational pilgrimage experience is a set of processes that can change perspectives, foster deep growth, and create lasting impact, Heather proposes eight developmental stages of a pilgrimage, culminating with integration of the pilgrimage experience. And today's presentation will highlight these stages with a particular focus on the final stage of integration, offering practical tips for pilgrims, leaders, and others who facilitate integrative experiences. And with that, please welcome Heather Warfield. Heather, it's so nice to have you with us today and share your experience on a topic many of us are exploring more actively. And I see you've already got your audio going, and you can get, or your video, you can get your audio going. And I think Barb will give you the access to the sharing. So in a second, you can get ready to share your presentation. And I just, while Heather's getting oriented, I just wanted to remind everybody this meeting's recorded. We're going to make it available on our YouTube channel after the event. And there will be time after Heather's address to take some of your questions. So Heather, you can open up your audio. And are there any questions you've got for me before I hand it off to you?
No, thank you, David, for that wonderful introduction. There's always a moment of panic to make sure that the technology is going to work. And so I was anticipating this moment, but it seems like everything is going well. And hopefully I'll be able to screen share shortly.
Okay.
It's so nice to be here. And I won't have another opportunity probably in my realm today to say Happy Flag Day. It is Flag Day in Canada, and so I want to wish you all a happy Flag Day. You've had 60 years of this brilliant flag. So, yeah, just a little plug for that. As
Okay.
David,
I got the red and white today, Heather.
and I wonder how many other people have red and white on.
Well, some of our volunteers have red and white, and you notice Dennis is one of them, but we've got a cast of enthusiastic volunteers behind the scenes, and I noticed a few of them had some red and white going. So thank you for acknowledging that.
Is that the tradition is to wear red and white then?
Yeah, yeah, you'll see a lot of it mostly on Canada Day, on the 1st of July. So we, but on it is a big number. So 60 years of wearing, of having red and white. So yeah, we've got
I should have gotten in on that tradition
this year. What's that?
I should have gotten in on that tradition. I knew it was Flag Day, but I did not know that it was appropriate to wear red and white. Otherwise, I would have shown up appropriately.
No way, that's all right. We appreciate that you're here, and importantly, have avoided any snowstorms. I'm looking out our window, and I know you're in the Northeast and anticipating some snow in New Hampshire, right? where you are?
That's right.
Yeah, so we're happy that, knock on wood, the tech is staying intact. So I'm going to hand it
Well,
off
I
to
am
you.
nervous. I am nervous. I hope the weather is declining as we speak, so we'll hopefully be able to get through
Okay.
this without any major blips.
Well,
Um,
we've got backup plans, but I'll hand it over to you to share, and then when you're coming toward the end of your remarks, I'll dip back in.
okay,
All right,
excellent. I
over to you,
see that
Heather.
I see I can share, so let me get in here. Um, let's see. There is a bit of an issue here.
Okay.
Let me get to the slideshow, which causes an issue where I cannot see the screen share. So let me try this again. Okay. I'm in. All
Great.
right. You can all
Yep.
see that okay? All
Yep.
right.
It's showing. So I'm going to dip out, and then you're good to go.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right.
Probably like many of you, I have an obsession with pathways, and so I am always incorporating some type of path into my slides. As David mentioned, my work has been focused on the universal themes of pilgrimages, and I have been looking at these themes sort of across all individual and particular iterations of pilgrimages to see if there are common themes, which I have discovered in my research. And so that is really where I tend to focus, is on these set of common themes, particularly around the shared psychological themes, which include meaning and the creation of meaning, a sense of belonging and connectedness, and then a sense of internal congruence, and then lastly, integration. So many pilgrims report that they are seeking some type of integration. And so that's where I'm going to land today, but I'm going to talk through the stages of pilgrimage because I don't think we can fully understand integration without delving into these earlier stages. So today's talk comes from, it's based on an excerpt from a book, which some of you may have, which is called Pilgrimage, a Spiritual Practice. I wrote a chapter in this book in which I propose these eight stages of pilgrimage, and so that's where I'm drawing the information from. The stages are not set in stone. They're a general guide for how pilgrims progress through their experiences. And the stages, there are some assumptions in these stages which primarily have to do with the length of time of the actual pilgrimage. Many people who are going on a 1 hour pilgrimage, maybe across town to a shrine, are not going to engage in this larger process in the same way as a Camino pilgrim would, or a pilgrim who is going on the Hajj, for example. So keep that in mind when I'm talking about this developmental process. The process starts. Let's see. Why is the Okay, there it goes. The process starts when one makes a decision to go on a pilgrimage, which is often an internal psychological kind of cognitive process, and ends with a very cognitive process, which is an integration of the pilgrimage experience into the self. And so, what we're talking about here really is the inner process of launching into a journey, and then the inner processes that happen throughout these stages that result into a deeply internal process of integrating the pilgrimage experience. So, I first want to address the decision to go on a pilgrimage because this is really where a pilgrimage begins. And for those of you who have been on the Camino or other pilgrimages, will likely remember some point that you decided to go on this pilgrimage. It could have been after watching the movie The Way, for example. It could have been that you learned about this from a friend, or maybe you read a memoir in which someone went on a pilgrimage. And so this process begins, as I said, at the moment that someone decides to go on a pilgrimage. And from this point forward, in some way, life is altered. and orients and pivots towards the pilgrimage. For people who have a strong religious framework, like those of the Islamic faith, the pilgrimage is a fundamental part of the religion. It's one of the 5 tenets of Islam, 5 pillars of Islam. And so this type of pilgrimage is often thought about for one's entire life. And so there's always something at the back of the mind of an individual who is thinking about making this type of pilgrimage at some point in their life. So the decision to go may happen from childhood and be a lifelong desire to actually go on the pilgrimage. But for someone who makes a decision as an adult to go on a pilgrimage, the decision to go may set into motion a series of angst-filled scenarios. From a relational perspective, tension may begin to emerge with one's partner, for example, or within the family, because one person may be turning their attention and energy and resources towards a pilgrimage. And the relational angst can occur if it is just one member of the family or one member of that social construct that is looking at going on a pilgrimage. I mention this internal angst and this relational angst because it plays a role in the later integration. So the decision to go also orients a person towards a sense of control over one's destiny, and this also plays a role in the later integration. The second stage of this 8-stage model is preparation for the journey. And this is where we really see that internal process or set of processes, the cognitive piece of decision making start to emerge to the external realm, where people may start hiking, for example, or walking long distances, or go shopping for backpacks, or start learning about walking sticks. Also, people may begin a process of becoming more healthy or losing weight or becoming fitter in order to prepare for this longer.
I see Heather's frozen. I'm going to just dip in here just to see if we can connect with her.
The
Oh, there
sites
we
along.
go.
Whoop, am I
You
still
were
there?
frozen. Yeah, you were frozen there for about 30 seconds there, Heather.
Okay. Um, So I'll return to talking about the fact that pilgrims are typically engaged during the preparation stage in a period of intense data collection or gathering of information about the pilgrimage itself. People often read guidebooks, they read memoirs during this period of time. They may begin engaging in social media discussion forums. This is also when an organization such as the Canadian Company of Pilgrims may start seeing people reaching out to engage with the organization. It often happens during this information gathering stage. The third stage, which is the journey, is the actual pilgrimage itself in terms of the travel piece of this. All of you will probably agree that the journey and the pilgrimage is the entirety of this process, but what I'm talking about here in this stage is when your feet actually hit the pathway of the Camino. This is also when what Jack Mezeray in the context of how transformation occurs in learning. So I really like this concept of a disorienting dilemma because I think that it is useful when we talk about later integration, that this disorientation can occur during the journey. And so this is where the external actions of the pilgrim meet the internal actions of the pilgrim, and the internal processes of the pilgrim are during this journey. I'm not going to spend too much time here talking about the journey because you all, I suspect, have a very good sense of what I mean here. But I also think that one part of the journey that I'd like to highlight is this concept of communal meal sharing, which oftentimes does not occur until the journey begins and is one of the variables in a pilgrimage that pilgrims report as being so important to their experience. And so this meal sharing piece, I think, goes hand in hand with the journey itself. The next stage is entering the sacred space, and I like to call this a sort of pilgrimage within a pilgrimage. Very often in pilgrimages across the world, there is a particular shrine, a religious site, a holy well, a uh, 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 some type of altar that is approached during the pilgrimage. It can be sort of the focal point of the pilgrimage, such as the cathedral in Santiago. And even though the entire journey is the pilgrimage, typically there is one site where pilgrims that pilgrims are moving towards, and it is this site where there is a pilgrimage within a pilgrimage. So very oftentimes, as pilgrims are preparing to enter the threshold of this holy site, uh, additional rituals may happen. People may cover their heads. They may approach the site on their hands and knees. They may remove their shoes or clasp their hands together as a sign of reverence. And at this point, much of the sacrifice that leads up to entering the place, much of that sacrifice culminates here. And the next step is then actually experiencing the sacred site itself. The fifth stage is the experience at the sacred site. This is where often heightened sensory experiences occur. There is so people are very attuned to the sounds of the site. They're very attuned to the visual experience and sort of symbiotic relationship that occurs between the site and the pilgrim, and also with other pilgrims. And people in this stage often experience an elevated sense of being present and being in the here and now. Also, during an experience at a site, a pilgrim may experience disappointment or a sense that the site didn't actually measure up to what the expectation was. And during this type of experience, people can begin to feel like maybe they missed it, that maybe the site or the environment in its underwhelming state isn't exactly fitting with what the pilgrim wanted to experience. And so many times when this happens, there's a cognitive dissonance that occurs. And in order to deal with this internal incongruence, people report that they had a positive experience, even though the experience wasn't necessarily positive. And this can then lead to a period of extended angst before the integration of the pilgrimage experience can happen, because the experience itself didn't quite match up with what. So the next stage of this pilgrimage process is the completion of the pilgrimage, and often transition from sort of this quote unquote sacred sense or holy sense to a more commercial set of endeavors, going shopping for mementos, for example, or taking a side trip to another location. These types of activities uh, sort of run parallel with pilgrimages and have always run parallel with pilgrimages. There's often a lot of debate around the commercialization of pilgrimage sites and along pilgrimage routes, when in fact this commercial aspect has always been present as part of the pilgrimage. But people can also start to experience a sense of loss at this stage in the anticipation of returning home. There can be a sense of grief that begins to set in as people realize that the pilgrimage is over and they are about to return to their routine lives. The next stage of the pilgrimage process is reintegration. And I differentiate this from integration because in my mind these are two separate processes. Reintegration has to do with the pilgrim re-entering the social and relational and maybe employment constructs that existed before the pilgrimage started. For many people, this is difficult. There is an adjustment period because when one has a profound encounter with the self, very often reintegration is akin to pushing a square peg into a round hole. Relationships seem different. There may be uh, a new desire to change a career or a new desire to experience life in a different way. And so very often, relational dynamics seem to come to the fore, and there can be some friction between one partner and another partner who has the partner who's gone on the pilgrimage and the partner who has remained at home. Friction can arise here. Friction can arise within the workplace because a pilgrim may have realized that what was experienced on the pilgrimage seemed more authentic and freeing and sort of a calling, and then returning to work in the mundane can be problematic. So in my mind, from a mental health standpoint, this is likely where we see either as mental health providers or maybe within groups and forums, people talking about how difficult it is to return home. It's multifaceted, and it isn't just a matter of the logistics of coming home from having a pilgrimage experience. It is trying to fit this new self and this expanded self into a construct that may be incompatible. So the last stage of the pilgrimage process, which is where we're going to land today, has to do with the integration of the pilgrimage or the set of pilgrimage experiences that are about the pilgrim and the individual going through this process of taking the experiences of the pilgrimage, taking the thoughts and the internal meaning creation and new ways of seeing the world and new relationships with other pilgrims, and integrating all of this within the self. Oftentimes, this can take years. It's not a process that simply ends within 6 months of returning from a pilgrimage. And probably many of you will have experienced the idea that one of the fastest ways to integrate a pilgrimage is to plan the next pilgrimage. So oftentimes pilgrims are like it can only occur. Whoop, am I stuck, David?
Yeah, it was just for about 10 seconds.
Okay.
But it's a key point, so I thought I'd just jump in. There've been one or two little breaks that haven't affected things, but you're on a really important point here, so I thought I'd dip back in.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think what I was saying is that this can be a time where people want to plan another pilgrimage because they have realized that all of these big experiences that have happened and profound connection with other people and sort of prolonged periods of authenticity and new ways of interacting with people, the only way that that could be maintained is to plan another pilgrimage. All right, so we've landed on this idea of the integration of the pilgrimage experience, and I like to think about it as moving from this idea of going on a pilgrimage. If we're thinking about the way that we engage in narratives about our lives, uh, people, when they first return from a pilgrimage, may talk about that time when I went on a pilgrimage, or uh, I'm a person who was going on a pilgrimage, to the idea that I am now a pilgrim. So we move from the action of going on a trip or going on a journey to actually being and embodying the identity of a pilgrim. In terms of how should pilgrims, or how could pilgrims um, kind of navigate through this period of integration, I think the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity is to fully embrace disorientation. Oftentimes, particularly in North America, we have a tendency to want to extinguish periods of disorientation. We want to get away from them. When we are uncomfortable or a scenario arises that causes this cognitive dissonance and angst, we oftentimes want to make the situation go away. And in the case of a pilgrimage, and in the case of this new way of being, and these oftentimes very big existential questions, even about life and the purpose of life and the meaning of work and how one wants to spend their time on this planet, that can often cause internal angst and suffering. And there's a tendency, I think, to want to reject that and to move through that as quickly as possible. And I don't think that is the answer for sustained or deep transformation. I think we need to embrace that disorientation uh, and accept it and live with it and grapple with it, rather than trying to push it aside and acting as if it would be better if it didn't exist. That may be the case. There may be some truth to that, and I also think that the friction is needed to become a better person, and certainly a more insightful, authentic person. So, linked to this embrace of the disorientation, I think it's important for pilgrims to be patient with this internal process and patient with other people. Probably many of you, even on social media and in your chapter meetings, you are in a constant state of hearing other pilgrim stories, and I will get to that in a moment about how that can be facilitated. But I think it's important to be patient with the self and be patient with other pilgrims. This is an adjustment process. Integrating a pilgrimage experience for many people is probably going to be in the top experiences of their life or of their lives. And so adjustment from a psychological standpoint takes anywhere from 6 months to 18 months. And so being able to sit with the memories of the pilgrimage and the experiences and the newness of the pilgrimage can take upwards of 1 year, and in some cases longer. And so I think just having a realistic expectation is also really important. I think it's also important to recognize that other people have not been on the pilgrimage with you. And so they're not approaching your experience as a pilgrim or your stories as pilgrims or the new way of seeing the world. They're not going to see it in the same way because they have not experienced the pilgrimage in the same way. Even for people who are partners or families who have been on pilgrimages together or friends, it's not exactly the same experience for everyone. And so there's going to be a lot of differences in the way that individuals conceptualize and reflect on and create meaning of the pilgrimage experiences. I think in all of this, and it's one of the goals that I had for this publication in Pilgrimage as Spiritual Practice, is that I wanted to give readers and pilgrims and leaders and pilgrimage facilitators a tool to help pilgrims conceptualize their pilgrimages from a much wider view, and not only the period of time that is spent actually on the Camino or in another pilgrimage context. And my biggest goal actually was to help people prepare for disorientation ahead of time. I think any time that there is a disorienting event, uh, we know this about trauma. Very often, if people can be prepared ahead of time, even in a situation with military personnel, for example, to be prepared ahead of time for what could happen. Oftentimes, the incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder is decreased. I am certainly not suggesting that pilgrimage is a traumatic event, although for some people it could be. But I do think that there are parallels here as it pertains to disorientation or a disorienting dilemma. I've made a list of mechanisms for integrating a pilgrimage experience. This is just a stormed list that I made this week. I'm sure that some of you will have additional ideas, and I really look forward to hearing that during our discussion time in a few minutes. I have taken some of my knowledge about what works within the context of mental health therapy and have extrapolated it into this context of pilgrimages, because one, these strategies or mechanisms work, and two, I think they're particularly well suited for pilgrims who are often already reflective individuals who grapple with big issues in a way that may be different than others. So the first one is journaling. Some of you may already be doing this. You may have a practice of journaling. If you don't, I would highly suggest implementing it at the first instance. Even before you begin the pilgrimage, I think it's important to begin to journal about your expectations and why you're motivated to go on the pilgrimage and what you expect may happen, or what could happen that you are not expecting, or ways of interacting with people that may change. I think it's important to have the expectation that, as I said, the post-pilgrimage time can feel very akin to pushing a square peg into a round hole. So journaling is important. Storytelling is absolutely important, and I suspect that many of you who have been on the Camino or other pilgrimages spend a great deal of time telling stories. There is a wonderful, robust pool of literature around the therapeutic value of storytelling, as well as the meaning making that can occur every single time we tell stories. So storytelling can be very important. One of my favorite narrative psychologists is a man by the name of Brian Schiff at the American University of Paris. And he has talked about the process of narrating and shifted the focus from a narrative to narrating, which is an action. And the very act of narrating brings the past into the present. And so storytelling not only helps to create meaning of an experience, it actually causes that experience to be made present. And that can be particularly helpful and relevant for pilgrims who are talking about and sharing about their pilgrimage journeys. Another mechanism for integration has to do with creative expression, painting, creating, composing music. I mean, the avenues for creative expression are maybe infinite. And I think pilgrims do this well, and so I just want to highlight what you're probably already doing. This can go hand in hand with journaling. Many people end up writing a memoir or a series of blog posts or a newsletter, and I think that this is also a creative expression, in addition to serving a kind of written meaning-making process that we see happening with the journaling. Another mechanism for integration is mental health support. I wish we had more mental health providers who were trained in how to help people integrate a pilgrimage. I don't know if it is the case in the Canadian context, but in the United States, mental health providers often don't even ask about religion and spirituality, let alone transformational travel pilgrimage experience. Period of time to help integrate all of these new experiences into the self. Another mechanism is related to service and generosity. And I came in at the tail end of your annual meeting here and certainly saw examples of service happening right in front of me, where your board positions and other important roles within your organization are engaged in and engaged in by members of your organization who are doing this as an act of service, as well as an act of generosity with their time and resources. And so that's just one tangible example of how pilgrims can engage in service and practice generosity as a way of integrating the pilgrimage experience. Also, another way is to engage in rituals and other spiritual practices. Many times, pilgrims return from a pilgrimage with a new sense of devotion the certain dimensions of the. Whoop, am I gone again, David?
Yeah, just another little, I'd say about a 10-second break there. Just as you were talking about rituals and spiritual practices that we might undertake.
Okay. So many pilgrims will return from a pilgrimage with a newfound devotion to particular spiritual practices, or a new devotion, period. So it can be a heightened devotion to practices that existed before the pilgrimage, or it may be a new set of spiritual practices that tie one to the pilgrimage experiences. And I think that this can be an important part of ongoing integration of the pilgrimage itself. Cognitive reframing. This is after I added this to the list, I realized I might have to go into a bit more detail about this, but the short version of this is that we're rewriting stories in our own minds and the way we create meaning. And so this process of taking on the pilgrim identity is really what I'm addressing here. It is seeing the world through the eyes of a pilgrim, and I suspect many of you have taken this on and have kind of transformed into a person who sees the world through the eyes of a pilgrim. This is also tied to reauthoring narratives, and this can be life narratives, or it can be narratives about relationships, or it can be narratives around how we see ourselves as authentic people in the world. And so there are a lot of narrative practices that I promote and see as valuable in this process of integration. In terms of tips for leaders, I think there are so many opportunities for in-depth dialogue. A lot of chapters focus uh, on pilgrims telling stories, and that's an important part of this process. I think there needs to be another step here that is focused on really in-depth dialogue about how the pilgrimage has impacted individual pilgrims. And I teach group therapy, so I see this as akin to a group therapy type of process. I also think that it's important for leaders to have a wide network of community resources that can be uh, uh, given or accessed, or a referral given to who are returning. As I said, there may be the need for mental health support or relational supports or even medical supports for pilgrims who are returning. And so it's important to have an understanding about what those resources are that are in your communities, or in the case of people who may be in rural areas without a lot of resources, what may be available through telehealth or through other online systems. I think the last piece I'll say here around a tip for leaders has to do with the idea that oftentimes in the integration process, pilgrims take on this pilgrim identity, and it becomes their entire identity. And I think that is also not a healthy place to be. I think that we need to be dynamic and engaged in many different roles and ways in the world. And if I think of a Venn diagram and I think of the different circles that are intersecting on a Venn diagram, very often the pilgrim identity becomes huge um, at the loss of other parts of our identity. And so I do think that a healthy pilgrim identity is that which is part of a larger intersection of identities. But when one identity sort of overtakes us, that can lead to imbalance as well. So I think I have come in 3 minutes under my allocated time, which I am so pleased with myself about this. I've got my timer going, and I would be really happy to entertain any questions or comments that anyone has about what I have talked about.
Thank you so much, Heather. Really, really enjoyed that, and I've been looking forward to this, of course, for a little while. I was just scanning the Q&A for some questions, and Carla, I'm just going to ask you. Carla's behind the scenes. Carla, can you just have a little look? I didn't see anything specifically on what Heather was talking about in the last minute or so. I saw a lot of other traffic on some other topics, but
This,
if I missed anything, let me know. But I do have a question for Heather to get us going here. Um, I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit on the reauthoring of narratives. It was the one I circled early before you got to it, and you touched on it. But I wondered if you could elaborate on that just a little bit more, because I think I for one missed it, I think.
Sure. This was so I think that let me just gather my thoughts here. The I this so there's this is layered.
Yeah.
One of the parts that I'm addressing has to do with this newfound pilgrim identity and looking at life through the lens of a pilgrim and thinking
Mm.
about how life all fits together. But it also has to do with the fact that this square peg in a round hole. Many people encounter the breakdown of relationships when they return from a pilgrimage. And so there's a bit of reauthoring, I think, that who are going through the disintegration of a relationship. This is
Mm,
not a small percentage of people, actually, especially for Camino pilgrims. And so I think that when I talk about reauthoring a life narrative, it often includes reauthoring relational dynamics within the life narrative.
hmm. Yeah, that's very helpful. And certainly can identify with that. And the other question I had, and then I'll just turn it over to Carla because she may have gathered something by now. When you were talking about the different sacred spaces, I think most, if not all, of the examples were physical spaces. And in your research, have you encountered people considering other kinds of space as sacred? I'm thinking, for example, of um, somebody not realizing that that moment in the mountains was going to be the moment of a profound experience, but it became their sacred space. They might have been imagining another one down the road, literally down the road. But I wondered how often you have encountered people discovering very different kinds of sacred spaces, sacred to them, not necessarily physical, but nevertheless just as sacred.
That's a great question, and the short answer is all the time. I
Mm,
think we have in mind human-built sacred spaces that become the focal point of our journeys, but in fact, it is very often the case that it is an experience with natural elements, and that's a huge area of fascination for me, is how natural elements afford pilgrims something in particular, in a way of engaging that is different than human created structures. So yeah, absolutely. I don't think I've ever talked
mm, you're breaking up. Um, well, Heather's audio resets. Carla, can you
instances.
just, oh, we lost that last one. You don't, just missed
So,
about 10
yeah,
seconds.
I don't think a person leaving uh, uh, the house in a morning and walking to a cathedral is probably not going to have the same set of circumstances that someone on a longer pilgrimage is going to have. But I would say the majority of pilgrims that I have talked to, and it's certainly been the case for myself as well, the most significant parts of the pilgrimage have to do with the natural world. So I do appreciate the question, and the sacred spaces that we pass through that become the most important are very often not the ones that we were headed towards to begin with.
Mm, hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Carla, did you see anything that I might have missed in the Q&A questions for Heather specifically?
Yes, I have a few. One
Great.
is we're wondering if she could show the slide with the 8 sections again from the
All right.
beginning. The 8 stages. Sorry. Thank you.
Mhm.
That was the easiest question I'll ever have, Carla.
Fantastic.
When you were framing it, I realized this is well within my power to be able to do this quickly.
Fantastic. And this one is a little bit harder because we all know academic books are in a league of their own. Someone is asking that your book, Pilgrimage as Transformation Process, is on a certain website for $120 and is wondering if there's another online resource that is, you might not have an answer to that.
I think I froze, Carla. Could you, the last thing I heard you ask was you said something about academic books.
Oh, sorry. Yes. They are asking for you about your book, Pilgrimage's Transformative Process,
Yes.
and wondering if there's a lower cost version of it as it's on the website for $120. Do you know of that? You might not know.
I don't know.
That's okay.
We could have another presentation here about academic publishing.
I used to work for a college. I agree.
But if you can reach out to me after with your question, I may be able to assist in a different way.
Fantastic. It might be available as an ebook somewhere. And this is just a comment, not a question, from our favorite Tom Friesen. As a chapter coordinator, I feel it is as important that we assist pilgrims to unpack their Camino as it is to prepare them for the pilgrimage in the first place. I think many of our groups do a great job on Camino 101. Perhaps we have to start to emphasize the return 102. You did mention that concept in your talk.
Yes.
A bit. Thanks, Tom.
I agree with you, Tom.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't supposed to say his name. Sorry. One other person asked, Heather, so insightful and helpful. Thanks. Can you speak a little more about how one best creates a journal? Does an online blog count? Posting on Facebook? Or are those creative outlets?
I think it can be an online blog. It can be Facebook. I actually, in preparation for this, was toying around with a journal template. And if that would be helpful for your members, I'm happy to share that. Based on the 8 pilgrimage stages. So this is very much contextualized to what I presented today. There are many ways of viewing this, but I'm a developmentalist, so that's the way I view it. So I think any and all, there isn't a correct way to journal. I think whatever works for the individual, as long as the thoughts are getting out in some way. It can be even a series of audio files if you have a phone with a recorder and kind of speaking your thoughts. I think it's just a way to get thoughts out of the mind and into paper or an online, Word document or Google Doc or audio file. That's the important piece here.
Yeah, absolutely. Any others, Carla?
Yes. The next one is, how significant might learning and using the local language of the pilgrimage site be in preparing for, experiencing, and leading to the path of integration?
I think that engaging with local people is absolutely an important part of any pilgrimage experience. And so I don't know that it is a make or break situation, but I think what the answer I would say is the more that a person can engage with the local culture and people, the better off the experience is going to be.
Thank you. And this you did talk about a little bit, but someone is saying, do you find that reintegration transformation depends on the length or amount of time on the Camino?
Yes, and I see it in other contexts. I'll give you a quick example. I've been working a lot in the past few years researching battlefield pilgrimages, particularly those that happened after the First World War. And for people who even go on a pilgrimage for one day to a battlefield or even for 1 hour, this type of experience can provoke such disorientation and sort of a stream of existential questions that it can be difficult to integrate that experience without thoughtful consideration and honestly all of the mechanisms that I talked about. So I do think length of time is important, but also I think this, which is why I keep coming back to the idea. I think that what maybe is the variable that corresponds the
Frozen again there, Heather. Well, we've gotten through much. Oh, there you go.
Whoop.
Missed you for about 10 seconds.
Okay, so I think that there is a direct correlation between the magnitude of the disorienting experience or the disorientation and the length of time that it takes one to integrate a pilgrimage experience. So I don't know that it's necessarily tied to the length of time or the number of days or hours that are spent in a pilgrimage, but I do think that there's something around how much or disorientation occurs while the pilgrimage is going on.
Thank you. And the next one, can Dr. Warfield comment on the idea of pilgrimage as a liminal experience?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I can. Liminality is fascinating to me, and I actually think that in some ways it is another word for disorientation, because that's ultimately what's going on, is that a person is leaving what is known and is not yet somewhere else. And that can be within the self, or it can be in this embodied experience where one departs a location and is not yet at Santiago. So the pilgrimage and being an act of liminality is something that resonates very closely with me. And so I don't know if this person has a follow-on question, but I will say yes, pilgrimages are liminal experiences.
Thank you. Great. Loved your presentation. Thank you for the work you were doing. Not so much a question, but a comment around storytelling as part of integration. For me, a big part was having a debrief with a spiritual guide or Anam Cara to just listen to me and to hold the space. It was a vital part of my recent integration. That's not really a question, but did you want to comment on that, or?
I love the fact that there was a spiritual guide to bear witness to this particular person's pilgrimage experiences. I think that's that's exactly what I'm talking about in terms of it is really important to have other people there to listen and again to bear witness and to hear about the pilgrimage experiences of other people.
Thank
I
you.
see we're just getting up to, we've got about 3 minutes to the top of the hour. I think we've got time for one more question before I turn it over to Lauren to close out our meeting. Any other questions?
There are many,
yeah.
many more questions.
I really, yeah, it's funny because like I think there's a time delay on the questions popping up on my screen, but I'm glad you're able to scan these and catch them. So see if you can grab one there, Carla, and we'll answer that one, and then maybe what we can do is gather the rest and figure out a way to get some of those answered as well afterward.
When my partner last did the Camino, I flew over to meet him, and together we toured parts of the country he had not visited. Do you think this interfered with the effects of the Camino, or do you think, or do you see this as easing the transition from the pilgrimage back to life integration?
Hard to determine. I think there isn't a right way to do this. I think people get very much caught up in following rules, or they want to make sure that the experience has optimal outcomes. And so no, I don't think that you flying over to meet your partner and travel around diminish the experience at all. And it may have enhanced it. I mean, it's hard to say. We only know what happened, right? We only have the present. So I think that, I mean, what a wonderful act to be able to go and spend time with your partner after they finish the Camino. And what a wonderful way to have this extended buffer time before coming back home, to be able to talk and process and share about the experience in a way that was not so sudden, that your partner did not leave one day and fly back. And so I think it's wonderful that you were able to do that.
Well, we're just about at the top of the hour. Thanks, Carla, for navigating the questions. And yeah, that notion of a buffer is pretty important. Heather, having made the mistake of not having a suitable buffer after a different kind of Camino, which was being an hospitalero with my wife, and not having a space after that big Camino experience. So a little different, but these are really super important considerations. But Heather, thank you so much for joining us,
Thank you.
and I'm so glad to hear from you, and I'm glad that the tech held out fairly well. And of course, with every virtual meeting, there's always a little something, but you gave us lots to work with, and it's a busy season for all of us. We're all in the midst of Camino 101s, and to Tom's point and others, we can maybe incorporate some of these right away into some of the meetings that we've got lined up in the coming weeks. So with that, I'll invite you to turn off your camera and mic as I do the same, and we'll hand it over to Lauren to close out our meeting. So I'll catch up with you after the meeting, though, Heather. Bye for now.
Thank you, Heather and David. There was a lot to reflect on there, so that was awesome. Members, please note that we are sharing a video version of our AGM, the business part, on our website, and we'll also have Heather's presentation there also, and Heather's presentation will also go on our YouTube channel. And to all members across the country and beyond, thank you for attending this year's annual general meeting. To exit the webinar, just click on the Leave button, which is generally located near the bottom of your screen. After you exit the webinar, you'll be taken to a short survey, which we hope you will participate in. Your answers will help us to plan our next year's AGM. Thanks again, and buen camino, everyone. We'll see you on another opportunity online. Bye for now.